The man destined to rule Chicago's underworld was starving to death. Not for a lack of food, but from a surplus of fear. Nico Salvatore, heir to a criminal empire, hadn't eaten a real meal in 187 days, convinced every plate was poisoned. His father, the Don, watched his son waste away while their rivals circled. Doctors couldn't cure him. Chefs couldn't tempt him. He was a ghost in a bulletproof penthouse, rejecting gourmet meals from the city's finest restaurants. But then, a desperate bodyguard brought him a simple, cheap container of soup, bought from a little trattoria, and cooked by a waitress who was hiding a secret far more dangerous than his. The penthouse wasn't a home. It was a fortress, occupying the entire top floor of a private high-rise on Chicago's Gold Coast. Its windows were 3-inch-thick ballistic glass that offered a muted, billion-dollar view of Lake Michigan. For Nico Salvatore, it was a prison. He stood by one of those windows, his reflection staring back at him, gaunt, pale, with eyes that held the frantic, hunted look of an animal in a snare. His $5,000 Brioni suit hung on his frame, a mockery of the power he was supposed to represent. Behind him, a crash. "Inutile!" Antonio Salvatore roared. The word, useless, echoed off the marble floors. Nico didn't flinch. He just watched the splatter of risotto alla Milanese slide down the wall. It had been flown in from a Michelin-starred chef, tasted by 2 bodyguards, and served on sterling silver. It was now garbage, joining the remnants of a dry-aged porterhouse from Gibson's and ravioli from Spiaggia. 8 months, Nico! Antonio, built like a retired bull, slammed his meaty fist on the polished mahogany table. 8 months since your mother. Since the incident. And you starve yourself. You look weak. You are weak. Nico's voice was a dry rasp. It's not weakness, Padre. It's caution. Caution? Antonio's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. Marco Falcone is practically dancing on our territory. He's sniffing around our operations on Wacker Drive. He thinks the Salvatore heir is a broken boy. And you? You prove him right. You hide up here, drinking your baby food from a box, afraid of a risotto. Nico's jaw tightened. The baby food was a case of sealed, medical-grade nutrient shakes he kept hidden in his private study. He drank them in the dark, disgusted by the necessity, but they were the only things he trusted, the only things that hadn't been touched. 8 months ago, his mother, Maria Salvatore, had died. The official report said heart failure. The family knew the truth. A long, slow-acting poison, undetectable until it was too late, administered by a trusted cook who had vanished the same day. Since then, paranoia had become Nico's only companion. Every plate of food was a threat, every fork a potential weapon. He saw the Falcone family's fingerprints everywhere. His caution wasn't madness, it was survival. But his father was right about one thing. He was weak. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from a profound, debilitating hunger. "Get him something else," Antonio snarled at his son's primary bodyguard, Leo Bianchi. Leo, a man who seemed to be carved from granite, nodded silently. "Where from, Don Antonio?" "I don't care. Go to that old place on Taylor. Get me a veal chop. Maybe the smell will remind him he's a man." Leo nodded again and left the room. Nico turned back to the window. He was a prisoner of his own name, starving in a palace of gold, and he didn't see any way out. Trattoria Milano wasn't on the Gold Coast. It was deep in Little Italy, on Taylor Street, a relic of a bygone era. It had red-checkered tablecloths, Chianti bottles dripping with wax, and a cranky, 70-year-old chef named Paolo, who believed garlic salt was a culinary innovation. Serafina Serra. Rossi wiped down a sticky table, her back aching. Her white apron was stained with marinara, and her feet throbbed in her cheap sneakers. To the customers, she was just a waitress, quiet, efficient, with sad eyes, and a tendency to stare at the door. No one knew she had a degree from the Culinary Institute of America. No one knew she could debone a duck blindfolded. No one knew she was hiding, running from a man named Derek, a corrupt vice cop who thought no was just a suggestion. She'd been a rising star in the culinary world, but after she'd testified against him, he'd made her life hell. She'd vanished, taking this cash-in-hand job, drowning her talent in vats of Paolo's watery minestrone. "Sarah!" Paolo yelled from the kitchen, his voice thick with a smoker's cough. "Your staff meal is getting cold. You want it or not?" Sarah sighed. "Coming, Paolo." Her staff meal was the only good food in the building. Paolo let her cook one dish for herself each night, mostly so he could steal her ideas. Tonight, she'd kept it simple. It was cold and damp outside, a classic Chicago autumn. She'd made pasta e fagioli, a peasant dish, but she'd made it right, pancetta rendered until crisp, a soffritto of onion, carrot, and celery sweated to perfection, good San Marzano tomatoes, cannellini beans, and a handful of ditalini. Her secret, though, was a rich, homemade chicken stock she'd simmered with a parmesan rind, rosemary, and thyme. She ladled a bowl for herself and was about to sit when the front bell jingled. Leo Bianchi entered, flanked by another suit. The restaurant went quiet. These were not Taylor Street locals. These were Gold Coast men, and their presence felt like a drop in temperature. "We're closed," Sarah said, her hand instinctively going to the small canister of pepper spray in her apron pocket. Her first thought was, Derek sent them. Leo ignored her and walked to the counter. "Pick up for Salvatore." Paolo bustled out, suddenly obsequious. "Ah, yes, Mr. Leo, right away. The veal chop, extra garlic." He handed over a heavy paper bag. Leo was about to turn, but he stopped. He sniffed the air. The restaurant smelled of stale wine and old garlic, but cutting through it was something else. Something rich, herbal, and real. It smelled like his mother's kitchen. His eyes landed on the pot on the back burner, the one Sarah had just served herself from. "What is that?" Leo demanded, pointing. "That is nothing," Paolo said dismissively. "Peasant soup for the staff." Leo walked straight into the kitchen, a violation of all restaurant protocol. Sarah tensed. He dipped a clean spoon into the pot and tasted it. His eyes, normally flat and lifeless, widened. It was simple, savory, and incredibly clean. It tasted safe. It tasted like home. It was the first thing in months that didn't feel like it belonged in the cold, sterile world of the Salvatore Empire. A desperate, insane idea formed in his head. The Don was desperate. Nico was dying. "I'll take this," Leo said. "Is not on the menu," Paolo protested. Leo dropped 5 $100 bills on the counter. "Get me a container, a big one, now." Sarah watched, her heart hammering. Paolo, seeing the cash, scrambled for a quart container. Leo didn't look at the chef. His eyes were on Sarah. "Who made this?" Sarah froze. Lying to a man like this seemed like a bad idea. "I did," she whispered. Leo's gaze was intense, analytical. He looked from her stained apron to her competent hands. He nodded once, slowly. He took the container of soup, the bag of veal, and walked out without another word. Sarah leaned against the counter, her legs shaking. She didn't know if she'd just served a customer or signed a death warrant. The Maybach was silent as it sped north on Lakeshore Drive, the city lights smearing across the blacked-out windows. Leo Bianchi held the container of soup in his lap. It was still warm. The veal chop was for the Don. This was a Hail Mary. He entered the penthouse. Antonio was in his study, smoking a cigar and finalizing a negotiation with a construction union representative over the phone. Leo bypassed him and went straight to Nico's private wing. Nico was where he'd left him, by the window. The rejected risotto had been cleaned up, but the sterile scent of bleach lingered. "Your father's veal," Leo said, setting the main bag on a sideboard. Nico didn't turn. "Give it to the dogs, if we had any." "Also," Leo said, his voice flat, "I brought you something else." He took the plastic quart container from a smaller bag and set it on the table. He peeled back the lid. The aroma filled the room. It wasn't the complex, overpowering scent of truffle oil or aged balsamic. It was the smell of rosemary, thyme, savory pancetta, and slow-cooked tomatoes. It was humble, warm, and utterly disarming. Nico tensed. He turned, his eyes narrowing. "Another trick. Get it out." "It's soup, Nico," Leo said, his voice softer than Nico had ever heard it. "From a dive on Taylor Street. I watched the waitress. I watched her serve it from the pot. No one touched it but her." Nico approached it like a bomb. He stared into the container. Pasta e fagioli. His nonna used to make this. Before the bodyguards, before the bulletproof glass, before his mother taught him to distrust anyone outside the family. Before his mother herself was killed by someone inside the family. "I won't eat it," he whispered, his hands fisting at his sides. "I tasted it myself, at the restaurant," Leo said. "A lie, but a necessary one. It's clean." Nico's stomach cramped violently. It was the pain of starvation, a deep, hollow ache that had become his constant companion. The smell was driving him mad. He was so hungry. "Leave it," Nico ordered, "and get out." Leo hesitated, then nodded and retreated, closing the heavy door with a soft click. Nico was alone with the soup. He stared at it for a full 10 minutes. It was a war. His paranoia, which had kept him alive, screamed at him. "It's a trap. It's too simple. Falcone is clever. He knows what you miss." But his body, broken and depleted, was screaming louder. "Eat, eat, eat." With a trembling hand, he picked up the plastic spoon Leo had left. He dipped it in. Just a bean and a bit of broth. He raised it to his lips, his heart hammering against his ribs. He sniffed it. He touched it to his tongue. Nothing. No metallic tang. No chemical burn. He put the spoon in his mouth. The flavor exploded. It was rich, perfectly seasoned, and tasted safe. It tasted like sunlight. He took another bite, this one with pasta, then another and another, faster and faster, like a starving wolf. He didn't stop until the container was scraped clean. He licked the spoon. He stood in the silent $1,000,000 room, breathing hard. It was the first real food he had tasted and kept down in 187 days. A tear traced a hot path down his cold cheek. It wasn't just food, it was life. He buzzed his bodyguard. Leo entered instantly, his face impassive, but his eyes darted to the empty container. Nico's voice was hoarse, but it held a new, hard edge. An edge that had been missing for months. "Find the person who cooked this," he commanded. "Bring them here. Now." The rain was coming down in earnest, turning Taylor Street into a slick, black mirror. Sarah was dumping mop water in the alley when the car appeared, its headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. It wasn't a cop car. It was a black Maybach, longer than the trattoria's entire kitchen. It glided to a stop, its engine a menacing whisper. Sarah's blood ran cold. "Derek, he found me. He sent his dealer, friends." She fumbled for her pepper spray, her fingers slipping on the wet canister. Leo Bianchi stepped out of the driver's side. The other suit from before emerged from the passenger side. They didn't look at her, their eyes scanning the alley, the rooftops, the doorways. "Serafina Rossi," Leo stated. It wasn't a question. Sarah's breath hitched. He knew her full name, not just Sarah from the apron. I don't want any trouble." "Don Antonio Salvatore requests your presence," Leo said, his voice polite, but leaving no room for negotiation. He opened the back door. "Requests? It's the middle of the night. I can't." Leo finally looked at her. His gaze was not unkind, but it was absolute. "That was not a request, Miss Rossi. Please, don't make this difficult." Terror warred with a strange, fatalistic curiosity. These men weren't Derek's thugs. They were something else, something older, more powerful. Going with them felt like a terrible, irreversible mistake. But staying and having them make her go felt worse. Numbly, she slipped into the back seat. The leather was buttery soft and smelled of wealth and Cohiba cigars. The door shut with a heavy, final thunk. The drive to the Gold Coast was silent. Sarah watched the neighborhoods change from working-class brick to opulent stone and glass. They pulled into a private underground garage where an armed guard waved them through. An elevator took them directly into the penthouse. The apartment was staggering. It was less a home than a corporate headquarters, all marble, glass, and dark, imposing furniture. And standing in the middle of it all was Don Antonio Salvatore. "Miss Rossi," he boomed, not bothering with an introduction. "You are a difficult woman to find. Your social security number is attached to a culinary school, but your last 3 years are blank." Sarah's heart hammered. He'd run a check on her. I like my privacy." "So do I," Antonio said. He gestured to the empty container of pasta e fagioli still sitting on his son's table. "My son, Nico, has been unwell. Your food. It is the first thing he has eaten in months." Sarah stared at the container. That simple soup. "I'm glad he liked it." "Liked it? Miss Rossi, you may have saved his life." Antonio walked toward her. He was shorter than Leo, but his presence was suffocating. "I have a proposition for you. I will pay you $500,000, tax-free." Sarah's mind went blank. 500,000? For what? "To cook for my son. You will live here. You will cook 3 meals a day, plus whatever he requests. You will be tested, you will be watched, but you will not be harmed. You will be, for all intents and purposes, the highest-paid private chef in Chicago." Sarah's head was spinning. $500,000. It was enough to disappear forever, to go to another country, to open her own place, to be free of Derek. But a cage was still a cage. "And if I say no?" she whispered. Antonio smiled, a thin, cold expression. "I admire your talent. I would hate to see it go to waste. Paolo, at the trattoria. He is an old man. Kitchens are dangerous, greasy floors, hot oil. It would be a tragedy." The threat was clear, and it wasn't just to Paolo. It was to her. She was a loose end, he'd found, and he wouldn't let her go. "I see," she said, her voice shaking. "Good. I have conditions," she said, surprising herself with her own boldness. Antonio raised an eyebrow. "I keep my apartment," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "I don't want to live here. This isn't a home. I'll come every day. I'll cook whatever he wants, and I want to be paid weekly, in cash, and I get to go home at night." She needed an escape route, a place that was hers. Antonio stared at her, assessing. He saw her fear, but also her steel. He respected it. "Fine, you keep your hovel, but Leo will drive you, to and from. You will speak to no one about this. You will see no one. You are now, officially, employed by the Salvatore family. You start tomorrow. 6 a.m. "Don Antonio," a quiet voice said from the shadows. Sarah jumped. She hadn't seen him. Nico Salvatore emerged from a darkened hallway. He was taller than she expected, and thinner. He looked like a Renaissance painting of a suffering saint, all sharp cheekbones and haunted dark eyes. He was looking at her, not at his father. "One more condition, Padre," Nico said, his voice a low rumble. "She is not to be searched." Antonio looked shocked. "Nico, she must be—" "No." Nico's gaze was locked on Sarah. Her food is clean. She is clean. You put your guards on her. You pat her down. You treat her like a prisoner. And the food will be spoiled. The taste will be gone." He was speaking of paranoia, of the invisible taint he perceived. She cooks, that's it. No one touches her. Antonio, stunned to see his son asserting any will at all, finally nodded. "As you wish." Nico looked at Sarah. "I'll see you in the morning, Miss Rossi." Sarah just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She'd been hired by a Mafia don, on the word of his paranoid son, to cook peasant soup for $500,000. Her life, which was already complicated, had just become lethally insane. The Salvatore kitchen was a chef's dream and a prisoner's nightmare. It was a vast expanse of stainless steel, sub-zero refrigerators, and a royal blue La Cornue range that probably cost more than her apartment. It was also sterile, windowless, and equipped with 3 visible security cameras. For the first week, Sarah cooked for a ghost. She would arrive with Leo at 6 a.m. She'd enter the silent kitchen. She'd prepare breakfast, simple, rustic dishes. Baked eggs with fresh ricotta and herbs, a frittata with zucchini and basil, oatmeal simmered in milk with a touch of honey. She'd place the plate on a warming tray by the kitchen service door, ring a small silver bell, and leave. She would retreat to a small, adjoining pantry room, her designated waiting area, and watch the camera feed. Nico would emerge from the shadows, always alone. He'd inspect the food, he'd sniff it, he'd scan the kitchen, his eyes lingering on the camera where he knew she was watching. Then he'd take the plate and disappear. Minutes later, the plate would be returned, empty. Then she'd prepare lunch, a simple soup, a pan-seared chicken breast with lemon and capers, a fresh salad of arugula and shaved parmesan. Ring the bell. Retreat, watch him take it. Then dinner, osso buco, a simple roasted fish, cacio e pepe. He ate everything, every single bite. Nico was changing. The gaunt, skeletal look was receding. Color was returning to his face. The tremor in his hands was gone. He was still a predator, but he was no longer a starving one. Their communication was limited to terse, handwritten notes he left on the empty plates. More time in the chicken. The sauce was too rich. My mother made polenta like this. That last one had stopped her. She'd made a simple, creamy polenta with a short rib ragu. It was a note of vulnerability, a crack in his armor. She started cooking with more intent. She made him things that were comforting, food from a childhood he must have missed. Simple apple cakes, rice pudding with cinnamon. She was, quite literally, nurturing him back to life. She, however, was miserable. She was a prisoner. Leo was her shadow. He drove her to the kitchen. He drove her back to her apartment. He sat in his car outside her building all night. She had $60,000 in cash hidden under her floorboards after 6 weeks, but she had no life. The only variable was Derek. Her ex, the corrupt cop, hadn't given up. He'd been watching her. He saw her leaving her dump of an apartment. He saw her getting into a $300,000 Maybach every morning. One evening, as she stepped out of the car, Leo's phone rang. It was the Don. Leo turned his back to take the call, his focus broken for just a second. That's all it took. Well, 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 a voice sneered from the alley. Sarah froze. Derek stepped out, his cheap suit reeking of whiskey, his eyes lit with a greedy, possessive fire. "Traded up, have we, Sarah?" he said, gesturing to the Maybach. "Found yourself a sugar daddy, and here I thought you were just a scared little waitress." "Go away, Derek," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Not a chance. I see how this works. You're his property." He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in. "Which means you owe me. You're going to go inside, and you're going to get me $50,000. Or I tell your new boyfriend all about us, and about that little thing you saw." "I have nothing for you," she hissed, trying to pull away. "Wrong answer." He raised his hand to strike her. "I would not do that." The voice was not Leo's. It was cold, deep, and held an absolute, chilling authority. Sarah looked past Derek. Nico Salvatore stood on the sidewalk, not 10 feet away. He wasn't in his suit. He was in dark jeans and a black cashmere sweater, and he looked healthy. His shoulders were broad. His stance was confident. The ghost was gone. In his place was the Mafia prince. It was the first time she had seen him outside the penthouse. It was the first time he had been outside the penthouse in 8 months. Derek, a bully by nature, didn't recognize him. "Get lost, pal. This is a private conversation." "She's with me," Nico said simply. "Yeah? And who are you?" Derek sneered. "He's the guy you don't want to ask that question to," Leo said, his call finished, his hand now resting inside his jacket. Derek, a cop, finally processed the scene. The Maybach, the $5,000 suit, now on Leo. The aura of untouchable power radiating from Nico. His face went white. He knew Chicago. He knew who owned the Gold Coast. "Mr. Salvatore," Derek stammered, his hand dropping from Sarah's arm. I'm Officer Miller. I was just checking on Miss Rossi's welfare." Nico walked forward until he was inches from the cop. He was a good 4 inches taller. He looked at Derek's hand, then at Sarah's arm, where red marks were already forming. "You put your hands on her," Nico stated. "No, sir, it was a misunderstanding." Nico didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "I saw you. You are a crooked cop who enjoys hitting women. And you just hit my cook." He looked at Leo. "Leo, get Officer Miller's badge number. Send it to our friends in Internal Affairs. And to the Sun-Times. I want a full investigation into his finances. I'm sure he's been a very busy man." Derek began to sweat. "You can't. I have friends." "Your friends work for me," Nico said. The casual dismissal, a brutal execution. "Now get off this street, and if I ever see you within 1,000 feet of her again, I will have you buried under the new stadium." Derek, utterly broken, scrambled backward, turned, and practically ran to his unmarked car. Sarah was shaking, her hand clutching her arm. Nico turned to her. His eyes, which had been black ice, softened as they landed on her. He gently reached out, his fingers tracing the red marks on her skin. His touch was light, but it sent an electric jolt through her. "He won't bother you again," Nico said, his voice a low vibration. You came outside," she whispered, stunned. "I was in the car," he admitted. "I've been restless. I wanted to see where you lived." He looked at her small, shabby building, then back at her. "Thank you, Serafina." It was the first time he'd used her name. For what? For the food? For this? He gestured, not at the street, but at himself, at his solid frame, his clear eyes. "You woke me up." He was standing so close she could smell the clean scent of his soap and the faint, lingering aroma of the rosemary chicken she had cooked for his dinner. The dynamic had shifted. She wasn't just the cook. And he was no longer the ghost. He was the boss's son, and he had just claimed her. The incident with Derek broke the dam. Nico was no longer content to be a recluse. He was back. He began appearing in the kitchen while Sarah cooked. At first, he'd just stand in the doorway, watching. Then he moved to a stool at the massive steel island. They talked. It was stilted at first. He'd ask about ingredients. Why time with the beans? It cuts the richness of the pancetta, she'd reply, her hands deftly chopping carrots. And rosemary. It's good for memory. My mother, she loved rosemary, he said quietly one afternoon, watching her truss a chicken. She had it in all the window boxes at our old house. Before. This. She must have had good taste, Sarah said softly. Nico's eyes darkened. They said it was her heart. But I know what it was. It was Marco Falcone. He used our cook, a man who'd been with us for 20 years. Sarah paused, her knife hovering over a clove of garlic. How? How do you know it was poison? Nico leaned forward, his voice dropping. My father had a private autopsy done, our own doctor. He found it, a compound he'd never seen before, a plant derivative mixed with a synthetic beta blocker. It mimicked cardiac arrest, but it was murder, a slow, agonizing murder over weeks. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Her hand started to shake, the knife clattering against the cutting board. Sarah, what's wrong? She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. A plant derivative mixed with a synthetic beta blocker. It couldn't be. It was too specific. It was impossible. What? What plant? She forced herself to ask, her voice a strained whisper. Nico frowned, trying to remember the medical jargon. Something. Aconitum. Our doctor said it was rare, obscure. Sarah's vision tunneled. Aconitum, wolfsbane, mixed with a bespoke beta blocker to mask the cardiac arrhythmia. She knew that formula. She had designed it. Not really. Not for murder. But she had identified it. The world tilted. The story about Derek, the abusive ex-cop. It wasn't the whole truth. It was the cover. The real reason she was hiding in a dead-end waitressing job was this. Before she fled her life, she wasn't just a chef. She had a side consulting business, using her culinary chemistry knowledge for a niche, high-paying field, forensic toxicology. She specialized in identifying exotic, food-borne poisons for private clients. A year ago, a security firm had hired her to analyze a compound for estate protection. They wanted to know if a rival could poison their client. They'd given her the components, and she'd written a full analysis on its properties, its lethality, and its ability to mimic natural causes. The man who'd hired her, the one she'd met at a discreet office in the Loop, his name was Marco Falcone. She'd thought nothing of it until she'd seen a small, buried news item about Maria Salvatore's sudden death. She'd recognized the timing, the high-profile family. She realized what she'd done. She hadn't just identified a poison, she'd confirmed its efficacy. She was a loose end. She knew the chemical signature of the Falcone family's greatest crime. She'd panicked. Derek, who she had testified against, was a real, but minor, threat. She'd used his harassment as a cover story to vanish, hiding her identity, her money, and her past, taking the most anonymous job she could find. And now, by a cruel twist of fate, she had been delivered straight into the hands of the victim's family. Sarah? Nico was standing now, his hand on her shoulder. You're white as a sheet. What is it? She looked at him, her eyes wide with a terror that was far deeper than Derek had ever inspired. Nico, she choked out. The soup, the pasta e fagioli I made. What about it? The herbs, rosemary and thyme. I didn't just add them for flavor. It's a habit from my work. They are known in toxicology as mild purifiers. Thyme has antiseptic properties. Rosemary can help stimulate the nervous system. I think your body... I think it... He stared at her, not understanding. My body what? The final, horrifying piece of the puzzle slammed into place. Why had her food been the only thing he could eat? He thought it was nostalgia. He thought it was safety. It wasn't. His mother was poisoned slowly. What if the trusted cook had been poisoning Nico too? A smaller dose, to weaken the heir, to make him sick and paranoid, to destabilize the whole family. He wasn't just grieving. He was recovering. His body hadn't been craving his nonna's cooking. It had been craving the antidote. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. "Nico, I have to tell you something. And you have to promise. You have to promise you'll believe me." She pulled the thumb drive from the chain she wore hidden under her shirt. This is my old life. This is the research. The man who hired me to analyze that poison. It was Marco Falcone." Nico's face, which had become so warm and alive, turned back into the cold, hard mask of the man he was. "What?" he said, his voice lethally soft. "Did you just say?" The kitchen, which had become a sanctuary of warm scents and hesitant trust, instantly became a vacuum. The air crackled with a new, lethal silence. Nico Salvatore stood perfectly still, his transformation from a haunted recluse to a healthy man now freezing into a different, more terrifying state. The absolute stillness of a predator that has just cornered its prey. Sarah's hand, the one not clutching the USB drive, was pressed against her mouth. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She had just confessed. She had just admitted to the son of Maria Salvatore that she was, in essence, an accomplice, however unwitting, to his mother's murder. She was standing in a penthouse owned by the Mafia, confessing to the heir. Her life, she was certain, was over. Nico's dark eyes, which had recently begun to look at her with warmth, were now unreadable, flat and black. "Say that again," he commanded. His voice wasn't loud. It was a low, precise vibration that cut through the sterile air. He hired me," Sarah stammered, tears welling. "His name was Marco Falcone. He said he ran a security firm. He said it was for estate protection. He gave me the chemical compounds and I analyzed them. I wrote a report." "A report," Nico repeated, his voice dangerously devoid of emotion. "On this drive." She held it out, her hand shaking so violently the drive rattled against the chain. "It's all my old work. The chemical analysis, the sourcing, the invoice. I didn't know, Nico. I swear to God, I didn't know what it was for until I read the news about your mother." Nico didn't take the drive. His eyes were locked on her face, searching, analyzing, stripping away every layer. He was looking for the lie. He found none. He saw only a terror so profound it was almost paralyzing. He took a slow, deliberate breath. He wasn't just poisoning my mother. It wasn't a question. It was a conclusion, the final, horrifying piece of the puzzle slamming into place. "He was poisoning me," Nico continued, his voice a low growl. "A maintenance dose, something in my food, day after day. Just enough to keep me sick, to make the paranoia real, to validate the fear. He was trying to make me waste away." He looked at his own hands, no longer trembling, and fisted them. He wanted my father to see his heir, his only son, rot from the inside out, to break him, to break our family. He finally looked at Sarah, and the understanding that dawned in his eyes was so intense it made her gasp. "And then you came," he whispered. "You. The one person on Earth who knew the exact signature of his poison." "Nico, He didn't just happen to find you, Leo," Nico said, his gaze shifting to the corner of the room. Leo Bianchi was there, silent, his hand already inside his jacket. "It wasn't an accident. Your pasta e fagioli, all of it. My body wasn't just hungry. It was sick. It was being poisoned. And your food was clean." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Those herbs, the rosemary, the thyme. You said it yourself. They're purifiers. My body, it knew you were the antidote." He looked at her, not as a killer, but as a man witnessing a miracle of vengeance. "Falcone didn't just make a mistake, Sarah. He delivered the weapon and the cure straight to my front door." He plucked the USB drive from her hand. "Plug in your laptop. Show me." Numbly, she did as he commanded. She retrieved her laptop, plugged in the drive, and entered the layers of passwords. The file tree opened. She clicked on the folder labeled Falcon Imports, LLC. Nico leaned over her shoulder, his proximity suffocating. She opened the PDF. Toxicological analysis, compound 7B, aconitum, beta-blocker synthesis. He read her clinical, detached words. Highly effective, virtually untraceable, molecular structure designed to mimic sudden cardiac arrhythmia, slow acting in reduced doses. Cumulative effect leads to systemic failure, paranoia, and muscular degradation. Sarah shut her eyes, unable to watch him read the blueprint for his own family's destruction. She heard him take a sharp, ragged breath. Then he was moving. He pulled out his phone. "Leo," he snapped. "Get my father. Tell him to clear his schedule. Tell him we have a ghost, and I know his name. Get him here. Now." 20 minutes later, the penthouse study, which was usually dark and smelled of old cigars and leather, was a brightly lit war room. Don Antonio Salvatore sat behind his massive desk, his face a mask of stone. He had listened without interruption as Sarah, standing in the center of the room like a defendant, told her entire story. She told him about her past as a forensic toxicologist, the security firm, the analysis, the invoice. She told him about her realization, about the herbs, about Nico. When she finished, the silence was deafening. Antonio stared at her, his big, meaty hands clasped on the desk. Sarah felt her life hanging by a single, fraying thread. Finally, Antonio spoke, his voice a gravelly rumble. "You are telling me," he said, "that Marco Falcone was stupid enough to not only invoice you for the murder of my wife, but to let you live?" "He didn't know my real name," Sarah whispered. "The business was under an LLC. I think he tried to find me. That's why I went into hiding. That's why I was a waitress." Antonio looked at his son. Nico was not in the study. He was standing in the doorway, blocking the only exit, his arms crossed. He was guarding her. "This is not a liability, Padre," Nico said, answering his father's unasked question. "This is justitia. This is justice. She is the weapon Falcone built himself, and he has no idea she's pointed at his head." Antonio's hard eyes shifted from Sarah to Nico and back again. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. It was a terrifying sight. "He's right," the Don boomed, slamming a fist on his desk. This is a gift from the Diavolo himself." He stood, his mind already spinning. "For 8 months, we have had no proof, just suspicion. We've been bleeding territory because my son was a ghost, and I was a grieving husband. We looked weak. Now the Falcones are asking for a sit-down. They sent a message just this morning. They want to renegotiate the Wacker Drive territories. He thinks he's won, Nico said, stepping into the room. He thinks I'm broken. He thinks you're ready to fold. Then we will give him his meeting, Antonio said, his eyes gleaming. We will accept his terms. No, Nico said. Antonio froze. No, we don't accept his terms. We accept the meeting. But it's not a negotiation. It's an execution. He thinks I'm still sick. He thinks you're weak. We use that. Nico's voice was hard, confident. The shift in power was complete. It was no longer Antonio's study. It was Nico's. A neutral site, Antonio agreed, catching his son's fire. Public. Jean and Giorgetti's. We'll book the private room. He'll be arrogant, Nico said. He'll be relaxed. He'll think he's there to pick at our bones. He won't be expecting a fight. He'll have his sons, maybe his capo. But he'll be soft. And what of her? Antonio gestured to Sarah. We lock her here. She's done her part. She's too dangerous to have in the field. No, Nico said again, his voice final. Sarah looked at him, confused and terrified. What do you mean, no? Antonio demanded. You want to bring a civilian, a woman, to a resolution like this? Are you insane? She's the entire point, Padre, Nico said, walking to Sarah's side. He put a hand on her shoulder, a clear, possessive gesture. He has to see her. He has to know who beat him. He thinks he's a genius, a master plotter. He needs to see his grand plan, his untraceable poison, standing on my arm, healthy and beautiful. He looked down at Sarah, his dark eyes intense. He needs to look her in the eyes when he realizes that she, the woman he used to murder my mother, is the same woman who saved my life. I want to see his face when he understands that. Antonio Salvatore stared at his son. He saw the ghost was truly gone. In his place was a Don, a man colder, smarter, and perhaps more ruthless than he had ever been. As you wish, Capo, Antonio said, a rare note of profound respect in his voice. He picked up the phone. Get me our friends at Jean and Giorgetti. Tell them I'm booking a private party for tomorrow night. And Leo, call our men. Tell them the war is over. We're just settling the bill. The next 24 hours were a blur for Sarah. She was no longer a cook. She was a piece on a chessboard, the queen in a deadly game. She was moved from her pantry room to one of the opulent guest suites. She was not allowed to leave. That afternoon, a woman with a severe haircut and a measuring tape arrived. She said nothing, but measured Sarah for a dress. 2 hours later, a box from Neiman Marcus arrived. Inside was a simple, breathtakingly expensive black velvet dress, a pair of black Manolo Blahnik heels, and a small velvet box. Sarah opened the box. Inside was a pair of simple, elegant diamond and sapphire earrings. She was being dressed for her role, the Mafia prince's new fidanzata. A beautiful, silent trophy. That evening, as the sun set and painted the lake in shades of blood orange and violet, Nico came to her room. He was already in a custom-tailored charcoal suit, the kind that cost more than her culinary degree. He looked, every inch, the ruler he was born to be. You're shaking, he said, his voice quiet. I'm a cook, Nico. I'm not this. She gestured to the dress, to the armed guards outside her door. They're going to kill me. The second he sees me, he'll know. And his men will be outnumbered and outmaneuvered, Nico said calmly. He stepped forward and picked up one of the earrings. His fingers brushed her earlobe as he fastened it. His touch was cold from the autumn air, but it sent a jolt of heat through her. You are not a target tonight, Sarah. You are a symbol. He fastened the other earring. My father's men will be the waiters. They will be the valets. They will be in the kitchen. Marco Falcone and his sons will be in a steel box, and they won't even know it until the lid is shut. He stepped back, his eyes tracing the line of her throat, the fit of the dress. He will see you, he will recognize you, and you will say one thing. That's all. I'll tell you when. What? What do I say? You'll know. It will come to you. He held out his arm. It's time. The ride to Jean and Giorgetti was silent. Sarah sat beside Nico in the back of the Maybach, her hands clenched in her lap. Leo drove, another car with 2 more guards in front of them, and 1 behind. It was a funeral procession. They were escorted through a private entrance. The maitre d', a man whose smile didn't reach his eyes, bowed. Mr. Salvatore. Don Antonio is waiting in the Chicago room. They walked down a wood-paneled hallway. Sarah could hear the distant clatter and chatter of the main restaurant, but this area was tomb quiet. Leo and another guard opened the double doors. The room was classic Chicago steakhouse. Dark wood, dim lights, a long table set for 10. At one end sat Don Antonio. At the other, grinning like a jackal, was Marco Falcone. He was flanked by his 2 brutish sons. "Antonio!" Marco boomed, rising and spreading his arms. "My old friend, it breaks my heart that we meet under such sad circumstances." He looked at Nico. "And Nico, figlio mio, you look thin. The grief has been hard on you, eh?" "It's been a difficult few months, Marco," Nico said, his voice as smooth and cold as glass. He pulled out a chair for Sarah, seating her directly across from Marco. Marco's eyes, small and greedy, immediately slid to Sarah. He licked his lips, his gaze crawling over her. "But you are finding consolations. A beautiful woman. A lovely distraction." "She's more than a distraction, Marco," Nico said, taking his own seat. He signaled to one of the waiters, who immediately poured wine. "She's my new private chef. She's a miracle worker. She's been taking wonderful care of me. My appetite has returned." "A chef?" Marco chuckled. "A very talented one, I'm sure." "Oh, you have no idea," Nico said. He raised his glass. "To new business." They all raised their glasses. Sarah's hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold the stem. "So," Marco said, setting his glass down, "Wacker Drive. My people tell me your unions are disorganized. My proposal is simple. I take over the territory. I give you 10% for your father's retirement." "A generous offer," Antonio said, his voice dangerously pleasant, "considering my son's condition." "Exactly," Marco said, leaning forward. "We are old friends. I am doing you a favor. I'm cleaning up your mess." Nico leaned forward, mirroring him. "The thing is, Marco, my condition, it was very specific. A terrible paranoia. No appetite, weakness. Our doctors were baffled. It wasn't until my new chef started consulting that we figured it out." Marco's smile twitched. "Consulting?" "Yes," Nico said, his eyes drilling into him. "She has a background in some very niche fields. Toxicology, for one. Isn't that right, Kara?" Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. This was it. This was the moment. Every man in the room was watching her. The waiters had stopped moving. Their hands were behind their backs. Marco Falcone stared at her, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was trying to place her. Sarah met his gaze. The terror was still there, but beneath it was a cold, hard rage. This man had used her. He had killed Maria. He had almost killed Nico. "Mr. Falcone," Sarah said, her voice clear and carrying across the table. "I believe we've met, though I was consulting under a different name. We spoke about aconitum." The name hit Marco like a physical blow. His glass shattered in his hand. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a mask of pure, primal panic. He knew her. He recognized her. The toxicologist. The loose end. The invoice. "You," he whispered, his eyes wide with dawning, absolute horror. His sons, confused, looked at their father. "Pop, what is it?" Marco lunged, screaming. "It's a trap! Kill them!" He was trying to flip the table, to reach for a gun he didn't have, but the waiters were already in motion. There was no chaotic firefight. It was a culling. The thwip, thwip, thwip of suppressed firearms was the only sound. Leo Bianchi was a blur, putting 2 rounds in each of Marco's sons before they could even get out of their chairs. Nico didn't shield Sarah. He stood, pushed her chair back against the wall, and stepped in front of her. He drew his own weapon from a holster under his arm. Marco Falcone was on his knees, wounded, gurgling, staring in disbelief at Antonio, who hadn't even flinched. Nico walked calmly to him, leveled the pistol at his head, and leaned in close. "My mother," Nico said, his voice a whisper that was louder than the screams had been, "loved Rosemary." He pulled the trigger. The silence that fell was absolute, broken only by the drip of wine and blood onto the carpet. Nico stood for a moment, his chest rising and falling. He tucked his weapon away, adjusted his cuffs, and turned. He was no longer the prince. He was the king. He walked back to Sarah. She was pressed against the wall, her eyes wide, shaking from head to toe. He gently took her hand. His was warm. "Leo," Nico said, his voice back to its normal calm timbre. "Clean this up. Send a message to the Falcone capos. Tell them they have a new boss." He paused, then looked his bodyguard in the eye. "And call our friends at the U.S. Attorney's office. Give them the file on Falcone's entire payroll. I want every crooked cop, judge, and politician he owned indicted by dawn, starting with Officer Derek Miller." He didn't wait for a reply. He kept hold of Sarah's hand, wrapped his free arm around her shoulders, and led her out the private entrance, leaving the carnage and the old regime behind. They stepped out into the cold, clean Chicago night. The city lights reflected in her diamond earrings. He had taken his family's vengeance, and in the process, he had claimed her, the waitress who had been both the poison and the antidote. The fall of the Falcone family was total. Their businesses were absorbed, their territories seized. Officer Derek Miller was indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of racketeering and extortion, his friends evaporating overnight. The Salvatore empire was more powerful than ever, but in the gold-plated penthouse, things were different. The fortress had become a home. The sterile kitchen was now filled with the scent of simmering sauces and baking bread. Nico Salvatore, now the undisputed and feared heir, never returned to his nutrient shakes. He'd found an appetite for life, and for the woman who had saved him. Serafina was no longer a prisoner. She was a queen, ruling from her kitchen. She had the protection of the most powerful name in Chicago, and the love of the man she had brought back from the brink. It was a dark, dangerous world. But it was theirs, and it all began not with a bullet or a bribe, but with a simple bowl of soup, cooked by a waitress who knew that the right ingredients could cure anything, even a poisoning of the soul. Thank you for listening to this story. We pour our hearts into creating dramatic tales of love, danger, and karma for you every week. If you enjoyed this journey, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this video with a friend who loves a good twist, and most importantly, subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Let us know in the comments what kind of story you want to hear next.